Nathan Whitmore sat in his expansive office, the glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city below. His fingers drummed absent-mindedly on the polished oak desk, the weight of responsibility pressing on him more than ever before. As a renowned architect with a firm that was the envy of the industry, Nathan had built a reputation for being a meticulous visionary, always on top of every project, every deadline, every meeting. Yet, despite the towering skyscrapers he had designed, the lavish contracts he'd secured, and the high-profile clients he'd impressed, nothing in his life felt as monumental as the single responsibility he was entrusted with every day. His daughter, Lily. Lily, only 7 years old, was the light of Nathan's life. After his marriage to Vanessa crumbled, and she left him for his former business partner, Richard, Lily had become the center of his universe. Vanessa had abandoned them without a second thought, choosing the allure of a comfortable life over the responsibilities of motherhood. Over the years, Lily had hardly heard from her mother, and when she did, it was usually a brief, impersonal call or message. Vanessa's abandonment had left an indelible scar on Nathan's heart, one that had been hard to heal, especially when he saw the pain in Lily's eyes as she clung to him, asking questions about where her mother was and when she would come back. That morning, as Nathan worked through a pile of emails and paperwork, Lily's voice broke through his concentration. She had appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed bunny, her eyes wide and earnest. "Daddy, do you think Mommy will ever come to see me?" Lily asked, her small voice trembling with the vulnerability that Nathan had grown so used to hearing in her words. Nathan swallowed hard, his throat tightening. The question hit him harder than he expected. He had done everything he could to provide for her, to be both a mother and father to her, but there were some things that he couldn't give her, the things a mother could. He put down the papers he had been reading and walked over to her. "Sweetheart," Nathan said gently, crouching to her level, "I can't say for sure when she'll come, but I'll always be here. You and me, we've got each other." Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide and full of longing. "But, Daddy, I miss her. I want to see her again. I don't think she loves me anymore." Nathan's heart shattered. How could anyone, especially a mother, make their child feel like they weren't loved? He hadn't realized just how deeply the absence of Vanessa had affected Lily. The girl who had once been so full of energy, who loved to run around the house with laughter ringing in her ears, now spent her days quietly playing alone, often staring out the window as if waiting for someone. Nathan gently cupped her cheek in his hand, brushing away a stray tear that had escaped. "She loves you, Lily, but sometimes people make mistakes, and it's not your fault. We can't control what other people do, but I promise you, I'll always love you." Lily nodded, her bunny clutched tightly to her chest, but Nathan could see the sadness in her eyes. As much as he tried to comfort her, he knew that something was missing in her life. A mother's touch, a mother's warmth, a presence that Nathan, no matter how hard he tried, could not replace. He exhaled slowly, running his hand through his hair as he watched his daughter. He couldn't keep up the pace of his work life and ignore her needs any longer. It was time to change. The thought struck him with sudden clarity. Perhaps it was time for him to take a break, to put the projects on hold, to give his little girl the attention she so desperately needed. For so long, he had put work first, thinking that financial security and success would be enough. But it wasn't. It had never been. What mattered was being there for Lily. The decision came so quickly, so naturally, that Nathan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He would take time off. Time for his daughter. Time to rebuild the bond between them that had frayed over the years. Time to heal, for both of them. He stood up and walked over to his desk, picking up the phone. "Ellen," he said, his voice steady but firm, "I need you to clear my schedule for the next couple of weeks. No meetings, no client calls. Just give me the time I need to take care of things here. I'll handle it from here." "Of course, Mr. Whitmore. Is everything all right?" Nathan paused for a moment, looking at the picture of Lily on his desk, the way her eyes sparkled with curiosity, the way she had always looked to him for answers. "Everything's fine," he said finally. "It's just time for me to focus on my family for a while." With the decision made, Nathan sat back in his chair, his mind racing with thoughts of what the coming weeks would bring. It felt strange, this choice to step away from everything he had built, his career, his reputation, his status. But as he thought of Lily, a sense of peace settled over him. This was right. This was what mattered. Little did he know that, in the days that followed, his life was about to take a turn in ways he never could have predicted. The days following Nathan's decision to take time off were filled with the sound of Lily's laughter, the kind of laughter that seemed to seep into the very walls of their home. They spent their mornings at the park, their afternoons in museums, and their evenings curled up with books and puzzles. For the first time in years, Nathan felt like he was truly living, not just existing in the fast-paced world of deadlines and designs. With every passing day, he could see the spark of joy returning to Lily's eyes, and it made the weight of his decision feel lighter. But deep inside, something still gnawed at him. The past, the betrayal, the scars of what had been lost, still loomed like shadows in the back of his mind. It wasn't always this way, he reminded himself. There was a time when his life had been picture-perfect, a time when he had it all: a thriving architectural firm, a loving wife, a future that seemed brighter than the sun. Nathan had built his success from the ground up, taking risks, making sacrifices, pushing himself to the limit. And for a while, it had paid off. Vanessa had been his partner, both in life and in business. Together, they had dreamed of a future filled with limitless possibilities. But dreams could shatter in an instant, and Nathan knew that better than anyone. The betrayal had been devastating. It wasn't just the affair with Richard, his best friend and former business partner. It wasn't just the way Vanessa had left, without warning, without remorse. It was the way they had taken everything from him: the clients, the business, the reputation he had worked so hard to build. Vanessa had turned her back on him and, by extension, on the life they had created together. She had left him and Lily to fend for themselves, and Richard, the man Nathan had trusted, had stolen the very foundation of his career. Nathan's thoughts drifted back to the day everything fell apart. He could still see the look on Vanessa's face, cold and indifferent, as she handed him the divorce papers. He had been blindsided. Their marriage had been built on love, or so he had thought. But in that moment, all the years of partnership, the late nights spent working together, the shared plans for the future, none of it mattered. She was gone. Richard, the one person Nathan had trusted above all others, had been the one to orchestrate the destruction of everything Nathan had worked for. Together, they had stripped him of his clients, of his position in the business world, and in a twisted sense, of his self-worth. In one fell swoop, Nathan had lost everything. But Nathan had always been a fighter. He had rebuilt his life from the ground up, determined to rise from the ashes of betrayal. He had started his own firm, one that would set him apart from the past, one that would define the future of architecture. The new firm focused on sustainable, eco-friendly designs, innovative, forward-thinking, and just the kind of challenge Nathan had always thrived on. His designs gained the attention of major investors and clients, and slowly but surely, he had regained his standing in the industry. His success had been hard-earned, and though he had built a new reputation, it never felt the same. It was as if every victory came with a reminder of what he had lost. Despite the accolades, the awards, and the contracts, Nathan found himself feeling empty. The office was cold and impersonal. The projects were exciting but lacked the warmth that used to come from sharing them with someone else. He had his career back, but his personal life was in ruins. The only thing that brought him any true sense of happiness was Lily. She had become the center of his universe, the only person who could pull him out of the deep, dark places his mind often wandered to. But even with her, there was an emptiness, a longing for something he could not define. Now, as he spent more time with her, he realized how much he had missed. The laughter, the small moments of connection, the warmth of being together as a family, even if that family was just him and Lily. But Nathan wasn't blind. He knew that something was missing. His heart, though healing, still carried the weight of the past. Vanessa's abandonment, Richard's betrayal. It was a wound that had never fully closed. And though he had forgiven them in his mind, his heart had yet to let go of the bitterness that lingered, a constant reminder of what he had once believed in. As he watched Lily play in the yard that afternoon, chasing after a butterfly with the kind of carefree energy he had long forgotten. Nathan couldn't help but think about the future. What would it look like now? Would he ever be able to fully heal from the past? Could he ever trust again, not just in business, but in people, in love, in relationships? These questions haunted him as he watched Lily, her face alight with joy, her world still untainted by the harsh realities of life. He promised himself then and there that he would give her the best life possible, no matter what it took. He had learned from his mistakes, and though the scars of betrayal still hurt, he knew they wouldn't define him forever. He had come this far. He could go farther. For Lily, for the family they had become, he would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Little did he know, the future was about to throw a curveball his way, and everything he thought he knew about trust, family, and love would be tested in ways he couldn't have imagined. It was a Friday evening when Nathan realized that the weight of responsibility wasn't just a daily challenge. It was something that seemed to shift and evolve in ways that he hadn't anticipated. After weeks of focusing on Lily, trying to fill the gaps of what had been lost, Nathan thought he had found a rhythm. The daily routine of breakfasts, drop-offs, school events, and shared moments was settling into a comforting pattern. But in his heart, Nathan knew that something was still lacking. Something still needed to change. That evening, after a long day of reviewing plans for a new project, Nathan sat at his desk, reviewing the usual flood of emails. The office was eerily quiet. The sharp buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead seemed almost too loud in the silence. His eyes darted to the clock on the wall. It was nearly 7. Lily would be at her dance class for the next hour. With no immediate meetings or calls to attend to, Nathan decided to take a break, hoping that a walk outside would clear his mind. As he stepped out into the cool evening air, he let the quiet of the city wash over him. It had been a long day of decisions and negotiations, and the solitude of the streets felt like a welcome reprieve. As he walked toward the nearby park, Nathan's thoughts once again turned to Lily. She seemed to be adjusting, but how long would it take before the loneliness of growing up without a mother started to eat at her? How long before she needed more than just a father to fill the gaps? Lost in thought, Nathan barely noticed the small figure standing near the crosswalk, the wind tousling her hair, her face turned toward the ground as if she were looking for something. Then, in an instant, a car sped around the corner, its tires screeching against the pavement as it hurtled toward the girl. Nathan's heart leapt into his throat. He ran. No time to think, no time to process what he was seeing. Without a second thought, he dashed forward, his legs moving faster than they ever had before. But just as he reached her, the girl seemed to sense the impending danger, and with a sharp intake of breath, she darted away, unaware of the oncoming vehicle. The car swerved, its horn blaring, but before Nathan could grab her, the woman, the girl's savior, appeared out of nowhere. A blur of motion, the woman's arm shot out, pushing the girl to safety. In the same instant, the woman fell backward, landing hard on the concrete as the car sped away, leaving a trail of exhaust in its wake. "Are you all right?" Nathan's voice was strained, his hands shaking as he knelt down beside the woman, who was already attempting to push herself up. Her face was flushed with the effort, a flash of pain crossing her features. "I'm fine, just a little shaken," she replied breathlessly, glancing at the girl she had saved. The child, wide-eyed and trembling, was now standing at a safe distance, watching them with a mix of awe and fear. Nathan took a moment to catch his breath, surveying the woman in front of him. She was disheveled, her clothes slightly torn and worn, and her face, though beautiful, bore the marks of someone who had been through more than her fair share of struggles. There was a hardness in her eyes, a layer of resilience beneath the immediate kindness she had shown. "I can't believe you pushed her out of the way like that," Nathan said, a tone of incredulity lacing his voice. "You saved her life." The woman looked down at her hands for a moment, as if trying to gather herself. "I couldn't just stand by and watch," she said quietly. "Sometimes, the only choice is to act." Nathan was still trying to make sense of what had just happened when Lily, her dance class long forgotten, appeared at his side, her eyes scanning the scene with curiosity. "Daddy, what happened?" Lily asked, her voice small and innocent. Nathan crouched down, placing a hand on her shoulder. "This lady saved the little girl from getting hit by that car," he explained. "She's a real hero." Lily's eyes widened as she took in the woman's appearance. "Wow, thank you for saving her," Lily said, her voice sincere and full of admiration. The woman smiled at Lily, her expression softening. "It's no problem. Just glad I was here in time." Nathan couldn't help but feel a tug of something deep inside. There was something about the woman, something he couldn't quite place. She was a stranger, and yet he felt an inexplicable connection. The way she had reacted, the way she had saved Lily without hesitation, made him realize just how much he longed for something more. Not just someone to fill the void, but someone who understood what it meant to fight for the things that mattered, to protect the people you love without question. "I'm Nathan," he said finally, extending a hand toward her, the remnants of his shock still lingering in his voice. The woman hesitated for a moment, then shook his hand firmly. "Emily," she replied. "Nice to meet you. And, I'm glad I could help." Nathan studied her for a moment. There was something in her eyes, a depth, a story she wasn't telling, something in her gaze that hinted at a past filled with pain, loss, and survival. It was a reminder that people don't just come out of nowhere. Everyone has a history, and Emily's was clearly one that had shaped her in ways that Nathan couldn't even begin to imagine. "Are you sure you're all right?" Nathan asked, concern creeping into his voice as he noticed her shaky hands. "I'm fine," Emily assured him with a small nod. "I'm used to things like this. Not the car part, but life. It has a way of throwing curveballs." Nathan didn't know why, but he felt an overwhelming urge to do something for her. This woman had saved Lily's life, and he couldn't just walk away without knowing if she needed anything. "I run a firm nearby," Nathan said, glancing back at Lily, who was now nervously shifting from foot to foot. "If you need any help, or if you're looking for work, I could always use someone like you, resourceful, quick-thinking." Emily looked up at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'd fit in with your world," she said carefully. Nathan frowned, his curiosity piqued. "Everyone has their place, Emily, and I believe everyone deserves a chance. You seem like someone who could be a real asset." She considered his offer for a long moment, before finally nodding. "All right," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'll take you up on that." As they exchanged contact information, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a simple act of kindness. Something had changed, and he wasn't sure yet what it was, but he knew his life was about to take a turn. A chance encounter, a fateful moment, and he had just invited someone into his world who might very well alter the course of his future. And in the days that followed, he would come to realize that Emily wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was a part of something far bigger than either of them could have ever anticipated. The following week, Emily arrived at Nathan's firm for her first day as his new assistant. She had cleaned herself up, put on the new clothes she had bought with her first paycheck, and her hair was now neatly tied back. Still, despite her polished appearance, something in the way she carried herself hinted at the tumultuous life she'd led. A quiet reserve, an almost invisible shield she wore to protect herself from the world around her. Nathan couldn't help but notice how different Emily seemed when she walked through the office doors. The confident, bold woman who had saved Lily's life was still there, but there was a vulnerability beneath the surface. He watched her as she settled into her desk, a little unsure, a little out of place amidst the sleek, modern design of his cutting-edge architecture firm. The polished glass walls and the minimalist desks seemed to mock the struggle she'd endured, but Emily, to her credit, didn't let it show. She was here to work, to build something, her life, her future, and she wasn't going to let the past dictate who she was. In her first week, Emily quickly earned the respect of her colleagues. She was sharp, resourceful, and unafraid to tackle any task, no matter how challenging. Her organizational skills were impeccable, and she had an uncanny ability to anticipate Nathan's needs before he voiced them. It wasn't long before Nathan began to rely on her in ways he hadn't expected. What had begun as a simple act of kindness had quickly turned into something much more. Emily was becoming an integral part of the team, and Nathan couldn't help but admire her drive, her resilience. Yet, while her work was exemplary, Nathan also noticed something else, something that made him uneasy. Emily was becoming a surrogate mother to Lily. Their bond seemed to grow deeper with each passing day, and while Nathan knew that this was a good thing for his daughter, it stirred something within him. He'd always been protective of Lily, shielding her from the harsh realities of the world, and now he was seeing someone else fill the role that had always been his. He told himself it was a good thing. He told himself that Lily needed a woman's influence, especially with Vanessa gone. But deep down, a part of Nathan began to wonder. Was he ready to let go of that role? Was he ready to share the responsibility of raising his daughter with someone else? Emily, for her part, had embraced her new life with cautious optimism. She had come to realize that Nathan's offer of a job was not just a lifeline. It was a chance to start over. It wasn't easy, though. The old habits still lingered, trusting people, opening up, and letting them in. There were days when Emily would slip into the quiet loneliness she had known for so long, the kind of isolation that had once felt comfortable, even safe. But Nathan's steady presence, his quiet support, had begun to chip away at those walls she had spent so long building. Lily was the key. Emily had never had a mother figure in her life, and seeing the bond between Nathan and his daughter stirred something in her, a longing for the family she had never had. As she spent more time with Lily, taking her to school, helping with homework, and playing games on the weekends, Emily began to realize how much she yearned for connection. She had always been a survivor, moving from one chaotic chapter to the next, but now she was beginning to see that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than just surviving. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Emily sat in the park with Lily, watching as the little girl ran around, her laughter filling the air. Emily smiled to herself, a bittersweet feeling washing over her. She had never had this before. This simplicity, this peace. It was foreign to her, but it felt right. Lily's carefree innocence was a reminder of the world she had lost, but it also filled her with hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a place in this world that didn't involve running, didn't involve hiding. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her reverie, and Emily turned to see Nathan approaching, his hands in his pockets, his expression contemplative. He smiled softly as he sat down next to her, his gaze following Lily as she twirled in the grass, her hair flying around her like a golden halo. "She's a special kid," Emily said, her voice low but filled with affection. Nathan nodded, his eyes fixed on Lily as she spun around. "She's the best thing that ever happened to me." There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared recognition of the journey they were both on. It wasn't easy for either of them. Emily had her scars. Her past was still a heavy weight to bear. But Nathan was starting to understand that it didn't define her. She was more than her history. She was becoming part of their lives in a way that felt natural, almost as if fate had played a hand in bringing them together. But as much as Emily had become part of the fabric of their family, there were still challenges ahead. Not everyone was as accepting of Emily's presence. Nathan's secretary, Olivia, had made it clear from the start that she wasn't thrilled about the new addition to the team. Olivia had always been the one to run the show behind the scenes, and she didn't take kindly to anyone stepping into what she saw as her territory. She would often make snide remarks, subtly undermining Emily's contributions, trying to make her feel like an outsider. At first, Emily had brushed it off. She wasn't in the business of making friends. But as the days went on, the tension between Olivia and her grew more palpable. The passive-aggressive comments, the cold stares, it was becoming harder to ignore. Nathan noticed, too. He had always trusted Olivia, but her behavior was starting to raise alarms. He wasn't blind to the fact that there was something off about the way she treated Emily. It wasn't just jealousy. It was something darker, something he couldn't quite place. And then, one day, it happened. Olivia accused Emily of stealing company funds. The accusation was as sudden as it was baseless, and when Nathan investigated, he was horrified by what he uncovered. Olivia had set Emily up, planting false evidence to make it appear as though she had embezzled money from the firm. Nathan was furious. How could someone he had trusted so completely turn against him like this? But the deeper issue was the effect this betrayal had on Emily. She had been through so much in her life. She didn't deserve this. He fired Olivia on the spot, making it clear that there was no place for dishonesty in his company. But the damage was already done. Emily's trust in him, something he had worked so hard to build, was now strained. She had opened up to him, let her guard down, and now she was wondering whether he truly saw her for who she was, or if he was just another person who would let her down. As the days passed, Emily finally sat down with Nathan, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I didn't ask for this," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I didn't ask for this life, these people, this, all of it." Nathan listened quietly, his heart breaking for her. "I never meant to put you in this position," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But I believe in you, Emily. I don't want you to go anywhere." And as they talked late into the night, Emily finally opened up about her past. The life she had once known, the people who had deceived her, the betrayal that had broken her. And as Nathan listened, he realized that Emily wasn't just a survivor, she was a fighter. And in that moment, he knew that he had made the right decision. Emily wasn't just working for him now. She was part of his world, part of his family, and he would fight for her, just as she had fought for Lily. But little did Nathan know, the challenges were far from over. Nathan stood in the midst of his office, the weight of the day's events pressing down on him. His hand still hovered over the phone, the urgency of the conversation he was about to make pulling him into motion. Emily's shocked face lingered in his mind, and the anger he felt toward Olivia was all-consuming. How could someone he had trusted, someone who had worked for him for years, betray him like this? The whole situation reeked of malice, and Nathan wasn't about to let Olivia's deceit destroy the trust he'd started to build with Emily. The moment he'd dismissed Olivia from the firm, it had felt like a heavy door had closed behind them. Nathan's gut told him he had done the right thing, but as he watched Emily's cautious eyes, the same ones that had once hidden so much pain, he felt a sinking sense of doubt. She wasn't naive. She knew that betrayals ran deep, that trust was fragile, and that even those who seemed to be on your side could turn against you. Sitting across from him in his office, Emily's hands twisted in her lap. She had tried to remain composed, but Nathan saw the tremor in her fingers, the nervous energy that pulsed beneath her calm exterior. He had seen it before. People with so much to hide, and Emily's past was no different. "You didn't deserve this," Nathan said softly, his voice tight with frustration. "None of this was your fault. I should have been more careful about who I brought into my life. But you, Emily, you're part of this team now, part of my life, and I'm not letting anyone take that from you." She didn't look at him. Her eyes were cast downward, studying her hands as if they held the answers to every question she had ever asked herself. It wasn't that she didn't believe Nathan. It was just that she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this family, this life, was too good to be true. "Why do you believe in me so much?" Emily asked, her voice a whisper, barely audible, but filled with a rawness that made Nathan's heart ache. He hesitated, searching for the right words. It was hard to explain something he hadn't fully understood himself. "Because I see you, Emily. I see the strength in you, even when you don't show it. I see how much you care for Lily, how you're trying to rebuild. You're not running anymore. You're standing still, for the first time, and I can't ignore that." The silence between them stretched, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. Emily looked up, meeting his gaze with a softness in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. For a moment, they were both just two people who had come from very different places but had found their way to each other. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. But the truth was that Emily's walls weren't just built out of fear. They were also made of guilt. She had spent years running from the ghosts of her past, burying the pain. But Nathan was bringing those ghosts to the surface. And as much as she appreciated his belief in her, she couldn't stop the nagging voice that told her she wasn't worthy of it. She wasn't used to people fighting for her. She wasn't used to being cared for without strings attached. When she had accepted Nathan's offer to work for him, she had done it with the quiet thought that she was a temporary solution, a job to get her back on her feet, nothing more. But now, she was starting to realize how deeply her feelings for him had grown. She didn't want to be just another person in his life. She wanted to matter. She wanted to be the person who stood beside him, not just as an assistant, but as something more. But could she? The phone in Nathan's hand vibrated, and he glanced at the screen. It was a message from Henry, the elderly man who had claimed to be Emily's biological father. "I'll be there in the morning. We need to talk about everything." The message sent a chill down Nathan's spine. He hadn't known how much of Emily's past she had hidden, but there was something in the way Henry had approached the situation that unsettled him. What did he mean by everything? And why now? Emily had already suffered so much, and the thought of dredging up even more pain for her felt like a betrayal in itself. Emily noticed his discomfort and turned her head slightly. "Who was it?" Nathan hesitated before answering. "It's someone who wants to talk to you. I think you need to hear what he has to say." Her heart skipped a beat. She had only recently discovered the truth about Henry, but hearing his name brought everything back to the surface. The mystery of her origins, the family she had been ripped from, the questions that had plagued her for years. But with every answer came the possibility of more heartbreak, more betrayal. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself to handle whatever he had to say? "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Emily admitted quietly, her voice trembling. Nathan's gaze softened. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But if you do decide you want to meet with him, I'll be there." For a moment, the air between them felt heavy, thick with all the unspoken words and emotions they hadn't yet confronted. Nathan reached out, gently placing a hand over hers. The touch was simple, but it carried with it a promise, an unspoken vow that no matter what happened next, he wouldn't abandon her. He would stand by her, no matter the storm they had to weather. Emily nodded slowly, her lips pressing into a thin line. She knew Nathan meant what he said, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that the journey she was about to take wasn't going to be easy. She had spent so long fighting alone. Could she truly allow herself to lean on someone else? Could she trust again? Before she could answer those questions, the door to Nathan's office creaked open, and in walked Lily, her innocent face lighting up the room. The weight of the conversation lifted slightly, if only for a moment, as Lily bounced up to Emily's side. "Are you okay?" Lily asked, her wide eyes filled with concern. Emily smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I'm okay, sweetie. Just a little tired, that's all." Lily studied her for a moment, then, satisfied, she turned to Nathan. "Can we go get ice cream?" Nathan chuckled, the tension in the room easing. "Ice cream, huh? You're lucky it's only Tuesday." The warmth of Lily's smile, the carefree joy in her eyes, was a reminder of the simple things in life that made it worth living. For all the pain and heartbreak Emily had endured, she was starting to realize that there was still light in the world, still love, still hope. And with Nathan, she was beginning to believe she could find it again. The invitation arrived in the most unexpected way, a crisp white envelope with elegant gold lettering. Nathan had never imagined a day would come when he would receive something so formal from his ex-wife. His finger traced the edges of the envelope, as if the very paper held the answer to some riddle he hadn't yet solved. Vanessa and Richard were getting married. His breath caught in his throat. He had spent years, not just in the physical distance from Vanessa, but in the emotional distance as well. The betrayal had cut deep, and even after all this time, the wound was still fresh. Vanessa's abandonment of him, the way she had chosen Richard over their family, had never truly healed. As Nathan stared at the invitation, memories began to flood back, the good, the bad, the parts of their marriage he had buried for his own peace of mind. He had never expected her to reach out again, and certainly not for a wedding. It felt almost cruel to receive this invitation now. Why after all this time? Why now, when he had finally begun to rebuild his life? But then, realization hit him like a wave. Vanessa's wedding wasn't just a personal issue. It was a business opportunity. A wealthy investor, someone Nathan had been trying to reach for months, was scheduled to attend the wedding. This was a chance to secure a vital partnership for his firm, one that could elevate his career to unprecedented heights. But there was something else, something deeper that gnawed at him. Was he really willing to face her, Vanessa and Richard? After everything that had happened, could he really stand there, pretending like the years of pain had never existed? Nathan sat at his desk, the invitation still in his hands, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on his chest. His first instinct was to toss it aside, forget about it, move on. But then, As he thought about Lily and everything they had built together, something shifted inside him. He wasn't going to let the past define him, not anymore. He had a chance to prove to himself and to Lily that he was stronger than the ghosts of his past. He had always been a man of action, someone who faced challenges head-on, even if those challenges came from places he least expected. So, with a deep breath, he made his decision. "Emily," he called, turning to the assistant who had been more than just an employee to him. She had become his anchor, his ally. "I need to ask you something." Emily entered the room, her gaze curious, but with a hint of concern. She had become more perceptive lately, sensing when something was weighing on Nathan's mind. He hadn't yet told her about the invitation, but he knew he couldn't keep it from her any longer. "I got an invitation," Nathan said, holding up the card, "from Vanessa and Richard." Emily raised an eyebrow, her lips parting in surprise. "Your ex-wife's wedding?" Nathan nodded. "They're getting married, and there's an investor attending. This could be a huge opportunity for the firm." He paused, then looked at her, his voice softer. "I was thinking, maybe you could come with me." Emily blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Come with you? To your ex-wife's wedding?" Nathan chuckled softly, the tension in the air easing just a little. "I know, it sounds crazy, but I don't want to go alone. I need to face this, Emily. I need to close that chapter of my life, and well, I can't do it alone." Emily looked at him for a moment, her eyes searching his face. She could see the vulnerability he was trying to hide, the way his jaw tightened when he spoke about his past. Nathan had always been a man of strength, but there was something in his eyes now that made her realize how much this moment mattered to him. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that," Emily said quietly. "I mean, your ex-wife. You're asking me to go with you? To pretend that I'm, what? Your girlfriend? Your fiancée?" Nathan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, unsure of how to explain it. "I don't want to pretend, Emily. I just don't want to face her and Richard alone. And besides," he paused, his voice dropping, "I don't think I can do this without you." The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Emily's heart fluttered as she realized what he was really asking. It wasn't about pretending. It wasn't about playing a part. It was about facing the past, standing together, and proving that they had both moved forward. After a long moment, she nodded slowly, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Okay, I'll go with you." Nathan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He hadn't realized how much he needed Emily's support, how much he needed her to be by his side until this very moment. She wasn't just a colleague anymore. She was his companion, someone who had become an irreplaceable part of his life. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice full of gratitude. "I don't know what I would do without you." Emily's smile deepened, and for the first time in a long while, Nathan felt like maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to understand the true meaning of trust. How it wasn't just about relying on someone, but about being willing to lean on them, to let them share the load. As the night of the wedding approached, Nathan found himself unexpectedly nervous. The thought of facing Vanessa, of seeing Richard, was unsettling, but he was no longer the same man who had walked away from that life. He had Lily, he had Emily, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was in control of his own destiny. When the night of the wedding arrived, Nathan and Emily dressed in their finest, both feeling the weight of the evening's significance. Emily wore a simple, yet elegant, black dress that made her look both timeless and beautiful. Nathan, in his sharp tuxedo, couldn't help but glance at her as she adjusted her hair in the mirror. "Are you ready for this?" Emily asked, her voice a mix of excitement and nervousness. Nathan met her gaze in the reflection. "I don't know if anyone could ever be ready for this," he said with a grin, "but I'm glad you're here with me." And so, they left together, stepping into a night that would change everything. The wedding was just the beginning, but neither of them could have anticipated how much the evening would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and about each other. The wedding venue was nothing short of extravagant. A sprawling estate adorned with flowers in full bloom, twinkling lights casting a soft glow over the evening. Nathan stepped out of the car, feeling the weight of the night press down on him, his nerves fraying ever so slightly at the edges. He had managed to suppress the emotions swirling inside him. But now, with every step he took toward the entrance, those feelings began to resurface. The past, the betrayal, the pain, the heartbreak, was still there, just beneath the surface, ready to bubble up at the slightest provocation. And then, he turned to look at Emily. She was standing beside him, calm, poised, her presence grounding him like an anchor in a stormy sea. Her confidence was unwavering as she walked beside him, and though she was clearly nervous, there was something about her that made Nathan feel like he wasn't facing this challenge alone. "Here we go," he muttered under his breath, trying to muster some semblance of composure. Emily gave him a reassuring smile, squeezing his hand gently as they approached the entrance of the grand hall. They were immediately greeted by the soft hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter from the guests milling about, all draped in formal attire. The atmosphere was elegant, almost surreal, and Nathan couldn't help but feel like he had stepped into a world that no longer belonged to him. This was Vanessa and Richard's world, a world he had been cast out of long ago. As they entered, all eyes turned toward them. Nathan had expected the attention, but the sheer intensity of it was almost suffocating. Whispers rippled through the crowd as they made their way through the room, some faces clearly recognizing Nathan, others wondering who Emily was. It wasn't often that Nathan Whitmore, the successful architect who had been a prominent figure in the city for years, entered a room without causing a stir. Then, his gaze landed on Vanessa. She was standing at the front of the room, looking radiant in a white dress that shimmered under the soft lighting. But as soon as her eyes met Nathan's, there was no mistaking the shock that registered on her face. She hadn't expected him to come. Not like this, not with Emily by his side. For a brief moment, her composure faltered, and a flicker of something, regret, disbelief, perhaps even jealousy, flashed in her eyes. Nathan felt an odd sense of satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about winning. It was about standing tall, about showing her that he had moved on, that he had built a life without her. A life that was rich with meaning, with purpose. And Emily, who had become more than just a colleague, was now at the center of it. "Is everything all right?" Emily asked, her voice cutting through the tension that had settled over them. She, too, could feel the weight of the moment. Nathan nodded, offering her a small smile. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "I'm fine." But the truth was, he wasn't. Not entirely. The years of bitterness and hurt came rushing back as he stood there, facing the woman who had once been the center of his world. He could see the smile she forced as she turned to greet him, the false politeness in her voice when she addressed him. "Nathan," Vanessa said, her tone clipped, "I didn't expect you to come." "Neither did I," he replied, his voice colder than he had intended. He met her gaze directly, refusing to look away, to back down. "But here I am." The tension between them was palpable, thick enough to cut through with a knife. But it was Emily's presence beside him that steadied his resolve. She stood there, poised and calm, her eyes steady on Vanessa, her expression neutral but warm. Nathan took a deep breath, then introduced Emily. "Vanessa, this is Emily," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "She's been helping me at the firm." Emily extended a hand, her smile polite yet distant. "It's nice to meet you, Vanessa." Vanessa's eyes flickered, an edge of surprise in them, before she offered a strained smile in return. "Of course," she said, but Nathan could see the discomfort in her eyes. She wasn't used to this shift, this new reality. The reality that Nathan had moved on. The guests had begun to settle into their conversations again, but the energy in the room had shifted. Nathan could sense the murmur of curiosity swirling around them, and he knew that word of his appearance, of his new companion, would spread like wildfire. But what struck him most wasn't the discomfort of Vanessa or the curiosity of the guests. It was Richard's gaze, the way it narrowed when he saw them together. There was something off about the way he looked at Nathan, something more than just the tension of old rivals. Richard's eyes darted between Nathan and Emily, a flicker of something dark passing across his face. Nathan didn't know what to make of it, but he had long ago learned not to trust Richard's instincts. The man had a way of manipulating situations to his advantage, and Nathan wasn't about to let him do that tonight. As they moved further into the room, Emily leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern lining her words. Nathan's gaze flicked back to Richard, who had been observing them from across the room. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice tinged with quiet resolve. "Let's just get through this. The investor's here, and we have a job to do." But even as he said it, he couldn't help but wonder if tonight was about more than just business. Something had shifted, something deeper than what he could explain in words. And as the evening wore on, it became clear that the past, no matter how hard they tried to bury it, was far from over. Emily, sensing his discomfort, stayed close by his side, never leaving him alone in the sea of unfamiliar faces. She wasn't just a date tonight. She was his anchor. And somehow, despite the tension that crackled in the air, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change everything. And as the music swelled and the guests began to settle into their seats for the evening's festivities, Nathan knew one thing for certain. He was no longer the man Vanessa had left behind. He had rebuilt his life, and with Emily by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. But there was still the question hanging over his head, the question of who he had really become in the years since the divorce. Was he really free of the past? Or was he merely waiting for the right moment for it to catch up with him? The night seemed to stretch on, the delicate strains of classical music from the string quartet weaving through the air like a thread tying the evening together. The guests milled about, exchanging pleasantries, the room filled with the hum of polite conversation. Nathan felt a tinge of detachment, as though he were watching the scene unfold from a distance, a stranger in his own life. The tension between him and Vanessa, the curious glances from the guests, and Richard's ever-watchful eyes made it all feel surreal. And yet, in the midst of it all, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Emily, ever graceful, seemed to have found her place among the guests, fitting seamlessly into the world of elegance and wealth that had once been Nathan's. She was poised, confident, engaging in conversation with anyone who approached, her warmth and authenticity making her a natural. For Nathan, it was like seeing a new side of her, one that reminded him of just how much she had become a part of his world. As they moved through the crowd, Emily caught sight of an elderly man standing by the far corner of the room. His appearance was unremarkable at first glance, his age evident in the wrinkles that marked his face and the slow, deliberate movements of his frame. But there was something about him, an aura, perhaps, that made him stand out even in the sea of well-dressed guests. Emily felt a strange pull, an instinctive sense that something important was about to unfold. Her steps faltered, and she hesitated before turning to Nathan. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice laced with curiosity. "I think I need to speak with someone." Nathan looked at her, puzzled but willing to follow her lead. "Are you okay?" Emily nodded, her eyes fixed on the man in the corner. "I don't know," she replied, her voice distant, as though trying to process something that hadn't fully clicked yet. "I think I've seen him before." Without another word, Emily made her way toward the elderly man, and Nathan followed, curiosity now gnawing at him. As they approached, the man's eyes, bright despite his age, met hers, and his face softened with recognition. "Emily," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I've finally found you." Emily stopped dead in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. She stared at the man, her mind racing to make sense of what was happening. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Do I know you?" The man's eyes clouded with emotion as he reached for her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "I'm Henry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your father." The word landed in the air between them like a thunderclap, reverberating with a force that left Emily stunned, her heart racing in her chest. Her mouth went dry, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. This man, this stranger, was claiming to be her father. Henry continued, his voice trembling with years of pent-up longing. "I never wanted to lose you. They took you from me, Emily, when you were just a child. I've spent years searching for you." The room seemed to fall away around Emily as the truth began to sink in. Her mind spun, struggling to make sense of the words, of the reality that was unfolding before her. She had spent most of her life alone, disconnected from any semblance of family, never knowing her true origins. The adoption, the years spent in foster care, the constant feeling of being lost, all of it had shaped her, but it had also left a void, a piece of herself she had never been able to fill. And now, here he was, a man claiming to be her father, the man who had been searching for her all this time. "I don't understand," Emily murmured, her voice breaking. "I don't understand. Why didn't you find me sooner? Why didn't you try harder?" Henry's face crumpled with regret, his eyes welling with unshed tears. "I did everything I could," he said, his voice choked. "But the system, the people who took you from me, they made it impossible. I've spent years trying to track you down, following any lead I could, hoping that one day I would find you." Emily took a step back, her mind reeling. Her breath quickened as the weight of the revelation settled over her. A father, a family she never knew. She wanted to reach out to him, to believe his words, but the years of uncertainty, of being alone, made it hard to trust anything, anyone. I don't know what to say," Emily whispered, her hands trembling at her sides. She felt a mix of emotions, confusion, anger, relief, and none of them made sense. Before she could process anything further, Henry continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You had a sister, Margaret. She passed away some years ago, but I've always believed that you would come back to me, that somehow you would find your way home." Emily felt her chest tighten as she absorbed this new information. A sister, a sibling she had never known. The loss of her, of someone she never had the chance to meet, was a weight that pressed down on her heart. "I'm sorry," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to handle this. I've never had a family. I've never had anyone who cared enough to look for me." Henry reached out to her, his hands trembling. "But I do care. I've always cared. I'm not asking you to come back with me, but I want you to know the truth. You have a place in my life, in my family. You always have." Emily closed her eyes, her thoughts swirling in a dizzying storm of conflicting emotions. She had found success, security, and belonging with Nathan and Lily. They were her family now, the ones who had shown her what love and acceptance really meant. But how could she turn her back on her biological father, the man who had spent a lifetime searching for her? Nathan stood quietly behind her, unsure of what to say, but instinctively placing a hand on her shoulder for support. He had known Emily long enough to understand the weight of the moment, the gravity of the decision she faced. Her past had just been thrust into the light, and now she had to decide what it meant for her future. As Emily looked up at Henry, the pieces of her life, her past and her present, began to collide. The life she had built with Nathan, with Lily, was precious. But so was this man standing before her, offering her a connection she had never known. And so, the battle between the past and the present began. What was Emily willing to sacrifice? What was she willing to embrace? Would the truth set her free, or would it tie her to a history that no longer fit with the life she had chosen? The answer seemed impossibly out of reach. And yet, Emily knew that whatever she decided, it would change everything. The weight of the revelation pressed heavily on Emily's chest, the room spinning as her thoughts collided in a swirl of confusion, grief, and disbelief. Nathan stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor amidst the storm of emotions. He could feel the shift in her, the subtle trembling of her shoulders as she wrestled with the enormity of the truth that had just been thrust upon her. Henry stood there, watching her with hope-filled eyes, his hands clasped together in a gesture of both plea and prayer. The words he had spoken echoed in Emily's mind. Your father, your sister, family. For years, Emily had navigated the world without a sense of belonging, never knowing the ties that could have connected her to something greater. And now, they were all suddenly before her, crashing into her reality like a wave too forceful to escape. But before she could make sense of it all, the night took an unexpected, tragic turn. Vanessa's laughter could be heard from across the room, too loud and too forced, her eyes darting between Nathan and Emily. She had been watching the scene unfold from a distance, her jealousy simmering beneath the surface as she saw Nathan moving on with his life, as though everything she had done, the betrayal, the lies, the destruction, had been for nothing. With a bitter edge to her smile, she excused herself from a conversation and made her way toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Richard, sensing the tension in the air, followed her, but there was a distant unease in his step, as though he were not entirely sure whether to intervene or let the storm play out on its own. Nathan was lost in thought, his gaze still fixed on Emily and her father. He wanted to give her the space to process everything, to make her own decision about the father she had just discovered. But as he glanced up, his heart skipped a beat. Vanessa, her face flushed with anger, had gotten into her car, the engine revving loudly as she sped out of the parking lot. "Vanessa!" Nathan shouted, instinctively starting to move toward the door. His instincts were honed from years of dealing with the unpredictable, but this was different. He could feel it in his gut. Something was about to happen, something that couldn't be undone. Emily barely had time to react before the screech of tires filled the air. The car, a blur of metal and speed, came tearing down the driveway, heading straight toward the area where Lily had been playing with other children moments before. Time seemed to slow, the panic rising in Emily's chest as her eyes locked onto the tiny figure of Lily, laughing and chasing after a butterfly, completely unaware of the danger closing in on her. Without thinking, Emily sprang into action, her heart racing as her legs moved faster than she ever thought possible. She heard Nathan scream her name, but there was no time to wait for him, no time to think. She could see the car bearing down on Lily, and in that instant, her world narrowed to a single purpose: save the child. Emily reached out, grabbing Lily just as the car came barreling toward them. The impact was sudden and brutal. Emily felt the force of the car as it struck her, pushing her body off the ground and sending her crashing to the pavement. Pain exploded through her chest, but she didn't register it. She could only focus on the child in her arms, who was now trembling in shock, her wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. Nathan reached them in what felt like an eternity, his hands shaking as he knelt beside Emily, his voice frantic. "Emily! No, please, stay with me." But Emily's breath was shallow, her vision blurry. She could hear Nathan's voice, but it felt distant, like she was listening to him from the bottom of a well. Her body was heavy, unresponsive, and the pain from where she had been struck seemed to radiate through every inch of her. She tried to speak, but her throat felt tight, the words trapped somewhere between her mind and her mouth. Nathan's hands were on her face, his touch gentle as he cradled her head, his voice breaking as he whispered to her, desperate, "Please, Emily, don't leave me. Don't leave Lily." Through the haze, Emily's hand moved weakly, her fingers brushing his, the barest sign that she was still with him. Her heart was beating irregularly, and every breath felt like it could be her last. But somehow, she clung to the idea of staying with Nathan, of being a part of his life, a part of this family that had taken her in. But as the ambulance arrived, the flashing lights reflecting off the glass of the building, everything felt out of control. She was lifted from Nathan's arms, her body limp, and rushed into the vehicle, her eyes fluttering shut as darkness closed in. Nathan stood frozen in the cold night air, his chest tight with fear, his heart pounding in his ears. Lily clung to him, her little hands gripping his shirt with all the strength she could muster, her voice breaking as she asked, "Is Emily going to be okay, Daddy?" He didn't have an answer. He couldn't lie to her, not when the truth was something he feared even more than he had feared the worst. All he could do was hold her close, feeling the weight of her fear pressing into his chest as they watched the ambulance disappear into the night. Emily's fate, whatever it might be, now hung in the balance. And in that moment, Nathan knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The hospital waiting room felt like an eternity. Time dragged, each tick of the clock growing louder in Nathan's ears as he sat there with Lily, his heart heavy with worry. Every passing minute felt like a new weight pressing down on him, threatening to crush him under the uncertainty of Emily's condition. His eyes would flicker toward the door every time it swung open, hoping for some sign that the worst had passed. Lily was curled up beside him, her small frame tucked under his arm as she clutched her stuffed rabbit for comfort. Her face, usually filled with boundless energy and laughter, was now pale and worn, her wide eyes too mature for her age. She hadn't spoken much since the accident, but Nathan could feel her fear radiating from her. It was the same fear he had, fear for Emily, the woman who had, in such a short time, become so important to both of them. "Daddy, is Emily going to be okay?" Lily's voice was barely a whisper, fragile as glass. Nathan drew in a deep breath, exhaling slowly as he turned to face her. Her innocence, her trust in him, was a balm to his fraying nerves. He had to believe that Emily would make it. He wouldn't, imagine a world without her. "I don't know yet, sweetie," he replied, his voice strained but gentle. "But we're going to stay right here together. And we'll be with her when she wakes up." Lily nodded, her small hand tightening around his. It was a gesture of solidarity, one that broke his heart in ways he hadn't expected. As if on cue, the door to the emergency room swung open, and the doctor entered. Dr. Harrington, a seasoned physician with a no-nonsense demeanor, took a moment to assess the room before his gaze fell on Nathan. His eyes softened, his voice steady but serious. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm glad you're here. We've managed to stabilize Emily's condition for now." Nathan's breath hitched, and his pulse quickened. "Is she?" "She's alive," Dr. Harrington interjected, "but it's still too soon to say how she'll recover. She sustained significant trauma to her chest and head from the impact. We're monitoring her closely, but there are concerns about internal bleeding and brain activity. Right now, she's in a medically induced coma to give her body the best chance to heal." The words struck Nathan like a physical blow, his world tilting dangerously as his mind tried to process them. He couldn't finish the sentence, the words too terrible to say out loud. "We're doing everything we can," Dr. Harrington said, his tone reassuring but lacking the certainty Nathan so desperately wanted. "But right now, we need to wait." Nathan's chest tightened, and for a moment, he could only nod in numb silence. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to know that she was fighting for her life, and there was nothing more he could do. But he couldn't give up. Not on her, and not on the life they had begun to build together. "I want to see her," Nathan said firmly, his voice hoarse from emotion. "Now." Dr. Harrington glanced at the nurse standing nearby, giving a small nod. "You can visit her, but only for a few minutes. She's still in critical condition." Nathan stood up immediately, taking Lily's hand. The two of them followed the doctor down the sterile hallways of the hospital, their footsteps echoing ominously in the quiet. Lily's grip on his hand tightened, and he could feel the tremor in her fingers. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and hope. When they reached the ICU, the door swung open, and they were led to a small, dimly lit room. Emily lay on the bed, a tangle of wires and tubes connected to her frail body. Her face was pale, her eyes closed, and her breathing was slow, shallow, punctuated by the soft beep of the machines monitoring her every function. Nathan's heart shattered at the sight of her, lying there so still, so vulnerable. His hand instinctively reached for hers, his fingers brushing her skin gently. He didn't care about the medical equipment, about the sterile hospital smell, about the soft, clinical buzz of machines. All he cared about was the woman who had, in a matter of months, become the center of his world. "Emily," he whispered, his voice breaking as he spoke her name. "I need you. Lily needs you. Please, come back to us." Lily, too, stepped forward, her small voice shaky. "I love you, Emily. Please wake up." Nathan's chest ached as he watched his daughter reach out to the woman who had become like a second mother to her. Emily had been there for her in ways he never could have anticipated, and now they were both on the edge of losing her. For a long time, they sat there, side by side, in silence. Nathan's mind raced with thoughts of the future, with the fear that Emily might not make it through this. What would they do if she didn't wake up? How could he face Lily's broken heart, knowing that he had failed to protect the woman who had so quickly become their everything? But as the hours passed, a small part of him began to feel a flicker of hope. He refused to believe that this was the end. Emily was stronger than this. She had proven time and time again that she could rise from the ashes, that she could fight through the darkness. And so, Nathan sat there, holding her hand, waiting, just as he had waited for everything that had brought him to this moment. He had fought for his career, for Lily, for the life he had rebuilt, and now he would fight for her, for Emily, no matter the odds. The future was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, he would face it with Emily by his side, or not at all. The days that followed were a blur of doctor's visits, tense waiting, and quiet moments of solace. Emily remained in a coma, the thin line between life and death flickering like a fragile candle in the wind. Nathan couldn't leave her side for long. His heart, once torn between his responsibilities as a father and his desires for a future with Emily, had only one place to be now, by her side, fighting for her recovery. He barely noticed the time passing, as if the world outside the sterile hospital walls had ceased to exist. Lily had taken to sitting quietly at the foot of Emily's bed, clutching her rabbit in her hands, her small face full of worry. She rarely spoke about the accident, but Nathan could see the questions in her eyes. Questions that only Emily could answer. For now, though, all they could do was wait. But life, it seemed, had a way of pushing forward, even when the heart wasn't ready. Vanessa, ever the opportunist, had been lying low since the accident. She hadn't made an appearance at the hospital, nor had she reached out to Nathan or Lily. Her absence, however, was not out of concern or grief. It was a calculated silence as she plotted her next move. Nathan was caught off guard when he received a call one afternoon, the number on his phone displaying the name he had long since hoped to forget, Vanessa. He hesitated for a moment before answering, his heart a mix of anger, frustration, and exhaustion. He had tried, time and again, to erase her from his life, but somehow she always found a way to worm her way back in. "Hello, Nathan." Vanessa's voice came through the phone, calm and cold, as if nothing had happened. "I heard about Emily. I wanted to know how she's doing." Nathan's hand clenched into a fist, his knuckles white with the pressure. "Vanessa, this isn't the time. You should have thought about Emily when you made the choices you did. When you decided to leave us for Richard." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Nathan could almost hear the smirk in her voice when she finally spoke again. "I'm not calling to rehash the past. I want to talk about Lily." Lily, his daughter, the one constant in his life, the one person he had sworn to protect at all costs. "What about her?" "I think it's time she and I had a talk. It's been a while since I've seen her, and I believe she deserves to know the truth about who I really am. I'm her mother, Nathan. She needs me." The words hit Nathan like a slap to the face. The audacity, the sheer arrogance of Vanessa's entitlement was staggering. After everything she had done, betraying him, abandoning Lily, and now she was pretending as if she had a right to waltz back into their lives like nothing had ever happened. "You abandoned her, Vanessa," Nathan said, his voice tight with fury. "You made your choices, and now you want to come back and undo everything? You have no right to claim anything. Not after what you've done." Vanessa's tone shifted then, cold and calculating. "You don't know what it's like, Nathan. You've always had everything. Your career, your daughter, your perfect little life. But me? I've been stuck in the shadows, cleaning up the mess you made of our marriage. I've had to live with the consequences of your failure every single day." Nathan felt a knot form in his stomach. The manipulation was clear. Vanessa wasn't sorry. She wasn't seeking reconciliation. She was simply trying to manipulate him into giving her what she wanted: access to Lily, a chance to tear their family apart once again. "I won't let you do this, Vanessa," Nathan said, his voice low and steady. "I won't let you come between us. You lost that right the moment you walked away." Vanessa let out a bitter laugh. "You think you can control everything, don't you? You think you can protect Lily from the truth. But the truth is, Nathan, you can't protect her forever. And soon, she'll see the truth for herself." Nathan slammed the phone down with a force that echoed through the room, his chest heaving as he tried to calm himself. The call had left him shaken. But more than that, it had reignited the fury that had been simmering beneath the surface since Vanessa's betrayal. He wasn't just protecting Emily now. He was protecting Lily, their future, everything they had built. Later that evening, Nathan stood at the window of the hospital room, his thoughts a storm of anger and resolve. He knew Vanessa wouldn't stop. She never did. She would use every trick in the book to get what she wanted. But Nathan was done. This time, there would be no more lies, no more second chances. As the door to the room creaked open, Nathan turned to see Olivia standing there, her face tight with concern. She had been an unwavering ally during the past few days, helping him with paperwork, managing the firm's day-to-day operations, and offering him a steady hand when his emotions threatened to overwhelm him. "Is everything all right?" Olivia asked, her voice soft but firm. "I heard you were on the phone with Vanessa." Nathan sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "She's trying to come back into our lives, Olivia. She wants to see Lily again." Olivia's eyes hardened. "Don't let her. She doesn't deserve to be a part of your daughter's life." Nathan nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. Olivia had always been a voice of reason, someone he could trust when everything else felt out of control. He didn't know how he would have managed without her these past few days. She had become a pillar of support, and a part of him knew that he was starting to depend on her more than he had realized. "I won't let her near Lily," Nathan said, his voice resolute. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect her." As if on cue, a soft beep from Emily's heart monitor echoed through the room, drawing Nathan's attention back to the bed. His heart clenched as he gazed at her fragile form, knowing that everything was hanging in the balance. Vanessa's manipulations, her lies, none of it mattered now. What mattered was Emily. What mattered was Lily. Together, they would rebuild their lives, no matter what obstacles were thrown in their way. And Nathan, for the first time in a long while, knew that he had the strength to face whatever came next. Vanessa had lost. And now, Nathan was ready to fight for the family he had found. The weeks after Emily's accident felt like a blur of hospital visits, sleepless nights, and quiet moments of uncertainty. But as each day passed, hope began to flicker again. Emily, once fragile and unconscious, had slowly begun to stir. First, it was a slight twitch of her fingers, then the faintest flutter of her eyelids. Nathan never left her side. He was there at dawn, at dusk, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement, even when it seemed like she wasn't responding. He refused to give up. Not on her. Not on them. The day she finally opened her eyes was the day the storm in Nathan's chest subsided, if only for a moment. He was sitting beside her, his face weary but filled with a quiet joy. When her eyes fluttered open, the first thing she saw was him. His face full of relief and something deeper, something she had longed for but never truly expected. "Emily?" His voice was soft, tentative. She blinked a few times, trying to focus. Her surroundings were hazy, unfamiliar, but the warmth of Nathan's presence was unmistakable. She opened her mouth to speak, but her throat felt dry. Nathan quickly reached for a glass of water, helping her take a sip. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Emily took a deep breath, her eyes searching his. There was a vulnerability in them, a question she didn't know how to ask. She had been given a second chance, but the road ahead wasn't clear. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to face it alone. "I'm alive," she whispered, a smile breaking through her pain. Nathan's heart swelled with emotion. He had been terrified of losing her, and now, here she was, awake and breathing, her eyes meeting his with the same warmth he had longed for. It felt like a new beginning, like the world was slowly resetting itself, piece by piece. "You're more than alive, Emily. You're my world." "You've been my world for so long now," Nathan confessed, his voice barely a whisper. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek. "I never thought I'd find something like this. After all the pain, after everything I've lost, I didn't know I could have a second chance. But here I am." Nathan kissed her forehead gently. "We're both getting a second chance. Together. You're not alone anymore." The days that followed were a slow but steady recovery for Emily. Each small victory, a few steps with help, an hour of rest without pain, felt like a triumph. Nathan and Lily, both by her side every step of the way, never wavered. They were a family, forged through trials and hardship, but bound by an unbreakable love. As Emily healed, her life began to take shape again. Nathan had asked her, many times, if she wanted to go back to the life she had known before, to reclaim her place in the world. But each time, Emily shook her head. Her old life, before Nathan, before Lily, seemed like a distant memory. She didn't want it back. She had found something better, something more real. "I want to stay here," she told him one evening, as the sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. "I want to build something with you. I want to build a life with you and Lily." Nathan smiled, his heart full. "We've already started, Emily. We've already begun." Their journey together was far from easy, but it was theirs, and that was enough. The firm that Nathan had built from the ground up had become a thriving business, and now, Emily was a part of it. She had her own vision, one that blended her entrepreneurial spirit with the eco-conscious design Nathan had always championed. Together, they created buildings and spaces that not only stood the test of time, but also contributed to the world's betterment. Their partnership was a perfect blend of heart and mind, passion and pragmatism. Emily was no longer the woman who had lost everything. She was the woman who had found everything: love, family, purpose. As for Lily, she flourished in the warmth of their newfound family. She was no longer the little girl caught between two worlds, caught between a father who had been hurt and a mother who had abandoned her. She had Emily now, not just as a mother figure, but as someone who loved her unconditionally. It was a bond that had formed through shared moments, laughter, and, most of all, trust. Lily had a home, a place where she belonged, and her heart was whole again. But perhaps the most surprising thing was the relationship that began to form between Nathan and Henry, the father Emily had never known. Henry had never stopped searching for his daughter, and now, with Emily's decision to stay with Nathan and Lily, he respected her choice. Though they didn't see eye to eye on everything, there was a mutual understanding, a quiet respect that began to blossom. Henry visited often, and though he had once hoped for Emily to return to his side and take her place as his heir, he now saw that she had found her true family. And that, in the end, was what mattered. Emily had given him a second chance to be a part of her life, and he took that role with a humility he hadn't had before. He wasn't the father who demanded things from his daughter anymore. He was the father who would stand by her, quietly, offering support where it was needed. As for Vanessa, she was nothing more than a distant memory now. Nathan had given up trying to understand her, trying to figure out the twisted logic that guided her every move. He had let go of the anger, let go of the hurt. What had once been a source of pain had become something he no longer allowed to define him. Vanessa had lost her chance. She had destroyed any relationship she could have had with Lily, and no amount of manipulation would change that. One evening, as they sat together in their home, Nathan, Emily, and Lily, there was a quiet peace in the air. The world outside seemed distant, insignificant. Here, in this moment, they had everything they needed: love, trust, and the promise of a future that was theirs to shape. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" Emily asked, her head resting on Nathan's shoulder as they watched Lily play in the yard. Nathan smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "All the time. It's like everything that happened led us to this. To us." "Yeah," Emily said, her eyes sparkling with a hint of mischief. "I wouldn't change a thing." And neither would Nathan. Together, they had built something beautiful, a life born not from perfection, but from the love that had endured every test, every trial. And that, he realized, was all that really mattered. A future built on love, on trust, on second chances. Their future. Thank you so much for staying with us and listening to the full story. We truly hope you enjoyed the journey and the characters as much as we did bringing them to life. If you loved the story, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our future content. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more exciting stories with you. Thanks again for being a part of this adventure, and we'll see you in the next one.